Good afternoon. My name is Angela Kutze, Chair of Romani Studies Program, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the CEU Strategic Planning Office, Nationalism Studies Program, and the Romani Studies Program at this very special CEU lecture by Malachi Hacohen from Duke University. And the title of his lecture is going to be Popper, the Open Society and the Central European University, Past and Future. First, I just would like to introduce our old friend Malachi Hacohen, who is a professor of history, Jewish studies, and religion at Duke University, and director of the Religions and Public Life program at the Canon Institute for Ethics, and member of the faculties of Jewish Studies and Slavic and Eurasian Studies. He teaches intellectual history and Jewish European history. He previously taught at Columbia University, New York University, and Reed College. His research interests focus on Central Europe and includes social theory, political philosophy, and rabbinic culture. Hacohen writes on the Central European Jewish intelligentsia, on nation-state versus empire in Jewish European history, and on Jewish-Christian relations. He has published on the European Jewish intelligentsia, Cold War liberalism, and cosmopolitanism, and Jewish identity in leading professional journals. One of his main books on Karl Popper's The Formative Years, 1902 and 1945, which was published by the Cambridge University Press in 2000, has won the Herbert Baxter Adams Prize of the American Historical Association and the Victor Adler State Prize, which is an Austrian state prize. Also, his Jacob and Esau, Jewish European History, it's another book, and Between Nation and Empire, which was also published by the Cambridge University in 2019, won the Center for Austrian Studies Biannual Book Prize. He was a fellow at the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, the Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Sciences, the National Humanities Center, and the International Research Center for Cultural Studies in Vienna, and will be in Leibniz, professor in Leipzig in spring 2023. So it's really a pleasure and privilege to welcome our distinguished guest, Malachi Hacohen. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, for this very generous introduction. And it's a pleasure, a privilege, and an honor to be here at the Central European University. I would like to talk to you today on Popper-inspired approaches to academic and social engagement. Philosopher Karl Popper was the subject of my early work, and he shaped my worldview as a young scholar. He was also the inspiration moving the founder of this university, George Soros. My biography of the young Popper in Vienna and in exile, drawing his vision as an unorthodox social democrat, would support your founder's political philosophy and social projects. The Central European University has always held a special place in my heart. I saw CEU as carrying out a Popper-inspired political and social vision with which I identified. Over the last 2 decades, I have collaborated in a series of projects with your history, Jewish studies, and Romani studies faculty, and could not but be impressed by the intellectual vigor and social engagement of your faculty and students, and by the international character of the university, highlighted when projected against the confined horizons of surrounding universities. Popper himself admired Soros's Open Society initiative. I believe he would have appreciated the Central European University in its later decades, too. I've also been a witness to the success of your configuration of academic and social engagement and to your struggles. I've seen you gathering leading international scholars in Jewish studies conferences, yielding innovative research, and wonderful international students in your summer schools, addressing captivating intellectual themes. You have been pathbreakers in Romani studies with amazing initiatives, both original and progressive. At Duke University, my home, we tenured last year a brilliant Middle Eastern historian of Hungarian origins who did his PhD at CEU. We have just hired in Jewish studies a Ukrainian postdoc doing innovative Russian immigration history. Her MA at CEU launched her career. Without your support, she would not be a Duke. But money is short, and she knows of Ukrainian colleagues who, having been recently admitted to CEU, could just not make it financially. Could the CEU continue and fulfill its original mission in a rapidly changing world? Popper and Soros had a vision of Central Europe, and the university was to help realize it. We are all cognizant of both the changing character of the CEU student body, now also a global and not only a Central European university, and with a new undergraduate curriculum, and its new location, its new cultural geography. My previous engagements with CEU took place in Budapest, but today I speak to you in Vienna. We are not here completely by choice. Clearly, for reasons well beyond the reach of CEU, Soros's hopes for political, social, and cultural changes that CEU will trigger in Eastern Europe have not been fulfilled. Where does this leave us? Post-war, Western universities prided themselves on the distance put between scholarship and social engagement. For excellent reasons, they believed that protecting scholars from social pressures would yield free, experimental, innovative scholarship, which political ideology may stymie. CEU did not have this luxury. To be sure, it too needed a protection from social and political pressures that Soros's benevolence afforded for 2 decades. But it had a political mission to enable an open society in Central and Eastern Europe by educating a generation of young scholars in the liberal academic traditions of Western universities. Alas, Western universities have meanwhile allowed market forces to undermine liberal arts education and subvert the scholarly traditions in which Soros believed. Alas, for all of CEU contributions, nationalism and populism, which Popper always dreaded, undermined the open society in much of Eastern Europe. It's not surprising that, as CEU searches for new paths in a changing world, Western universities would once again provide the model. Yet, CEU's unique combination of liberal scholarship and open society mission is more crucial today than ever. It represents a unique liberal path between Western professionalization and political authoritarianism. I want to urge you not to leave this path. Permeated by the Open Society mission, CEU vacillated from the start between a long-term view of scholarship and the practical tasks of the day. But its commitment to liberal scholarship has been unshakable. I would distinguish between CEU commitments and what passes nowadays for quote-unquote academic excellence and quote-unquote public engagement in many US and European universities. Truly, contemporary excellence and engagement are often surrogates for the professionalization of education and the mobilization of scholarship for corporate projects. They have little to do with Popper's or Soros's visions. I hope CEU does not go down this path. It would lose its soul. My lecture intends to draw us back to the founder's vision, and specifically to Popper's political philosophy, to derive inspiration and guide for the present, and urge you to stay the course. Popper and Soros did not have a close personal relationship, but there is no doubt about the formative role that Popper's philosophy had for Soros, or about Popper's support of Soros's social initiative. Soros was Popper's student at the London School of Economics in the early 1950s, and the two corresponded about Soros's psychology project in the mid-1960s, and again, very briefly, in the mid-1970s. But Soros was not part of the Popper circle. When Popper renewed their contacts in 1982, he apologized to Soros for not having been in touch since his student days, over a quarter of a century. And here you can see in the letter you have online, let me first thank you for not having forgotten me for something like 26 years. I'm afraid I forgot you completely. At the same time, Popper expressed his support and admiration for the Open Society Fund, beginning with Karl Popper's stipends for South African students. If, for 2 decades, Soros looked for a closer relationship with his mentor, by the 1980s, it was Popper who was looking forward to meeting with Soros, expressing his admiration and support, and inquiring about the Central European University. Soros was familiar with the older Popper of the post-war years and was impressed by the reception of his work, namely, by the reading of his masterpiece, The Open Society and Its Enemies, as an anti-communist Cold War book. He did not know young Popper in Vienna, the social democrat fearing the advent of fascism, or wartime Popper in New Zealand, in his New Zealand exile, forging a progressive reform platform under, quote unquote, piecemeal social engineering. Popper's close association with Hayek probably contributed also to Soros's impression that Popper was partial to laissez-faire, or market libertarianism. My biography of Popper, Karl Popper, The Formative Years, laid to rest this view. It is true that Popper became more conservative in the post-war years, but he remained a supporter of the welfare state. Soros thought that in seeking mechanisms to stabilize Eastern Europe, Eastern European societies, he was modifying Popper's Open Society. Truly, his revisions captured perfectly the original. Popper and Soros were at one. The CEU's founder saw the university as enabling an open society in Central and Eastern Europe. Both Soros's and Popper's lives were shaped by the loss of continental Europe to totalitarian movements. Rebuilding liberal democratic Central and Eastern Europe was their project and dream. Popper held his last seminar in April 1994 at the CEU in Prague, and he planned to lecture in Budapest the next October, but died in September. He was warning persistently about the danger of nationalism. Now, CEU has meanwhile become a global university, but its trajectory is still shaped by Central Europe, and its original mission remains unfulfilled. What configuration of academic and social engagement can one envision for CEU? Popper provided no blueprint, but his philosophy provides guidelines. I shall highlight his concepts of democracy and justice in the open society, his piecemeal social engineering in the poverty of historicism, and the critical rationalist vision of the public underlying his philosophy of science and politics. To Popper, democracy provided effective mechanism for changing rulers, resolving conflicts, and persuading opponents. He emphasized the orderly removal of rulers. I quote, "Governments of which we can get rid without bloodshed. The social institutions provide means by which the rulers may be dismissed by the ruled, and the social traditions ensure that these institutions will not be easily destroyed by those in power." Citizens' participation was one means among several to accomplish an orderly change of government. It was not an end on its own. This reflected a decidedly liberal rather than Republican or civic humanist vision of democracy, and Arendt, for example, would dismiss it. Living again, as we do in an age of rising dictators, real or in the making, we can feel again the force of his liberal conviction. Moreover, Popper made it clear that democracy depended on equality and justice, and a culture of critical debate was essential to it. Throughout his life, Popper disparaged those who claimed superiority to fellow humans. The common person, he said, was as good a judge of political affairs as intellectuals and politicians, and often a better one. I quote, "I hold with Kant that it must be the principle of all morality that no man shall consider himself more valuable than any other person. I assert that this is the only acceptable principle, considering the notorious impossibility of judging oneself impartially." Political equality was a function of this moral principle. Laws, rights, and duties ought to apply equally to all citizens. The thrust of his famous critique of Plato as a fascist was that Plato's concept of justice violated this equalitarian moral imperative. Popper surmised that Athenian democrats had a modern egalitarian concept of justice, and Plato sought to undermine it. Plato presented egalitarian justice as egotistical and his own hierarchical justice as altruist. He advanced a spurious argument about spheres in the human soul that corresponded to the division of labor in society. Plato concluded that justice meant the separation of classes. I'm reminded of today's ethnic minorities, in accordance with the division of labor, an affirmation of hierarchy and social and class divisions. In contrast, Popper affirmed that justice presupposed free and equal individuals. It was the task of the state to protect their equal rights and design a legal and institutional framework to ensure that they are never threatened by aspiring populist dictators. Popper's vision of justice was not only political, but also social. He understood freedom broadly as expansive social rights and economic security. The young Popper was an advocate of the welfare state, and the old one, while disenchanted and more conservative, never retracted this original commitment. In the open society, he outlined a comprehensive reform agenda for public policies, quoting, limiting exploitations by shortening the workday, ensuring that workers and all citizens are protected against disability, unemployment, and old age, guarantee livelihood to everyone willing to work. In short, the protection of the freedom of the citizens from economic terrorism. Conscious that the utilitarian phenomenon, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, could threaten freedom, that the state should not tell people what made them happy. Popper suggested an alternative, negative utilitarianism. Instead of maximize happiness, minimize suffering. To quote, from the moral point of view, suffering and happiness must not be treated as symmetrical. The promotion of happiness is in any case much less urgent than rendering help to those who suffer. Human suffering makes a direct moral appeal for help. There is no similar call to increase the happiness of one doing well. We are in witness of suffering people. It's our social and moral task to alleviate their suffering. In The Poverty of Historicism, initially a series of essays, then a book, Popper sought to develop a technological social science that will realize piecemeal social engineering. Social science, he thought, must be an instrument of progressive reform and design human institutions. A friend drew his attention to the emergence of the welfare state in Switzerland and in Scandinavian countries. Together with New Zealand's welfare reforms, the New Deal, and English labor legislation, they provided historical models for his social engineering. A world that attempts at social transformation by the Nazi and Soviet regimes were a prescription for totalitarianism. Popper called for changes to be gradual, leaving room for corrective feedback. All reforms had unintended consequences, so learning from errors was essential. As the totality of society remained inaccessible to scientists, piecemeal social engineers focused on limited reforms. Engineers introduced reforms cautiously, re-examining their effects, correcting themselves in mid-course. Social tinkering may grow into a planned society, but through cumulated improvement. Technological social science subjected reform to sciences, to quote, standards of clarity and practical testability. Yet, social science had an expansive policy agenda. In our world of diminishing welfare states, where so-called neoliberals do not hesitate to intervene to shape global markets, the vacuousness of free market rhetoric may have become evident. But in Popper's time, the battle between the emergent welfare states and market libertarianism raged on. Non-interventionism, or laissez-faire, Popper argued, was impossible. I quote, what freedom should the state protect? The freedom of the labor market, which amounts to the freedom of the rich to oppress the poor, or the freedom of the poor to unite? Whichever decision is taken, it leads to state intervention, to the use of organized political power in the field of economic conditions. The free market is paradoxical. If the state does not interfere, then other semi-political organizations such as monopolies, trust unions, etc., may interfere, reducing the freedom of the market to a fiction. The alleged clash between freedom and security is a chimera. For there is no freedom if it's not secured by the state. And conversely, only a state which is controlled by the free citizens can offer them any reasonable security. We cannot plan civilization, and especially the growth of reason, he conceded to Hayek. Grown institutions such as language or the market never have been consciously invented, but, he insisted, they should not be considered sacrosanct. He warned Hayek in 1946 that should your proposition that individual freedom is incompatible with a full satisfaction of distributive justice be true, then a real tragic conflict exists and freedom must destroy itself. I shall not easily be convinced. Society had a moral responsibility to alleviate suffering, and modern technology made resolving major social problems, above all, eliminating poverty, possible. We must not blame anybody else any longer, nor cry out against the sinister economic demons behind the scenes, for we can tame them. This social vision, which animated also the CEU's founder, may require an update so that it can speak to a global Europe, shaped by so-called neoliberal political economy and riveted by racial tensions. But the critical rationalist vision of democratic culture and scientific debate underlying Popper's social vision remains vital. Popper highlighted critical debate and openness to change as the acid test of political and scientific rationality, science understood as Wissenschaft, that is, as broad scholarship and academic exchange. Innovating on a familiar liberal motif shared by thinkers as different as Kant, de Stael, Guizot, Mill, and Habermas, Popper established a free public sphere as the conditio sine qua non of the open society, and thereby made us academics potential guardians or detractors of the open society. Popper's redefinition of scientific or scholarly objectivity as intersubjectivity, the scientific community's acceptance of criticism and experimental results made falsification possible, made it dependent on the public sphere, on dialogue and criticism. His philosophies of science, ethics, and politics merged into a unifying vision of the critical public. Critical discussion demarcated science, ethics, and democracy. Science's social institution, laboratories, periodicals, congresses furthered critical openness. They provided a model for politics. Democracy provided effective mechanisms for changing rulers, resolving conflicts, and persuading opponents. A culture of critical debate was essential to democracy. It required a free public sphere to debate and negotiate policies. The open society emulated the Republic of Science and in turn guaranteed the freedom essential to scientific progress. Totalitarianism would put an end to free criticism, destroying scholarship. Humanitarianism and egalitarianism were most compatible with the scientific ethos of criticism. The defense of scholarship and the open society was one. Thinkers from Kant to Habermas hit upon the critical public as guarantor of rationality. They also shared its dilemmas. Popper's public remained an ideal, an ought, rather than an is. How did the public or intersubjective criticism really work? Was access, let alone equal access, available to all? Once ideas entered the public sphere, who won? Did scholarly procedure and social reform really set discussion rules? The answer to all of these questions is of course not. One need not be a science studies, Marxist, or post-colonial critic to recognize that class, gender, and race hierarchies, bureaucracy, university administration included, corporate power, and armies can make a mockery of rational science and politics. Trust in public discussion is the open society's philosophy, but liberals know all too well that nationalist demagoguery and populist dictators can upend aspirations for the open society. One can only retain hope for the open society by showing how we will get there. Popper never did, and his radical cosmopolitanism exacerbated his problem. What source of solidarity could Popper hope to mobilize on behalf of his cosmopolitan community? Soros, however, had definite ideas. He offered policy-oriented solution to the central problem of critical rationalism. How could we work to make the ideal of the open public sphere real? It was not a coincidence that the Open Societies Fund first project was to offer stipends to South African students. Wissenschaft, science understood as broad scholarship, provided the model for the Open Society. Both Popper and Soros held education as the key to social mobility, access to the public sphere, and the formation of an educated public. But the Open Society project took them beyond their personal and theoretical limits. Neither was partial to ethnocultural communities. Both were ambivalent about their own Jewish identity. Popper was downright hostile and thought that Jewish assimilation was the solution to the Jewish question. The response to racial discrimination was an affirmation of universal humanity, the dignity of all individuals, and the malice of race, and not recognition of disadvantaged racial groups as deserving special advancement. But the intersection of class and race forced its way into the liberal mind and heart. From Black students in South Africa to Romani students at the CEU, ethnically marginalized communities have been beneficiaries of the Open Society initiatives. The Central European University especially provided Popper and Soros an opportunity, almost a deus ex machina, to shape stable liberal democratic societies in Central and Eastern Europe. Both Popper and Soros warned against the illusion that free markets would solve post-communist Europe's problems. Popper and Soros hoped that the CEU would become both a model and an instrument for forging democratic public and leadership. Extending educational opportunities to Eastern Europeans in a Western-style university became the linchpin of the strategy. I mentioned some of CEU's successes at the start of my lecture. I see them in Duke. You can see them in your faculty, in the audience today. We all realize the limits of this success. Victor Orban and not Václav Havel represent a new type of political leadership. And we are in Vienna and not in Budapest. But CEU could not possibly relinquish or marginalize the founder's vision. Further increasing CEU's considerable global reach would be in character with open society cosmopolitanism and with Popper's and Soros's hopes for Central and Eastern Europe, but not at the cost of the original mission. Globalism and cosmopolitanism must be rooted. What prospect does the CEU have without its Central European roots? It would lose its soul. As an outside admirer of CEU, I'm not privy to financial limits, but I can say that if there were adequate funds to continue and support Eastern European students with no resources, you would continue to source successes of the sort that I've witnessed and make an outstanding contribution, both Eastern European and global in character. I would also urge you not to take contemporary US universities as your model, but reaffirm your founder's vision. The open society was vested in a scholarly vision of liberal education, developing critical faculties and experimental thinking, not fearing errors, but learning from them. If you abide by the term from liberal arts to pre-professional education, from academic to corporate style management, you would betray the vision your founders had for the formation of a critical public, a bulwark of democracy. I wish you all success in your deliberation of the CEU's future. I'm hopeful. If I can do anything to help, let me know, because you remain a vestige of hope for the open society in a world run amok. Thank you.